From the Cronkite studios in downtown Phoenix, this is Cronkite News.
Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Cronkite News on Arizona PBS. I'm Owen Evans. Tonight, a look back at some of our top human interest stories, from a growing trend in the tattoo community, vegan ink, to how the Phoenix drag community is showcasing diversity and inclusion.
Members of Phoenix's Jewish community and supporters held a demonstration to advocate for better treatment and medical care for undocumented migrants. Cronkite News reporter Kevin Fleischman was at the rally and tells us why this group is mobilizing.
Dozens of protesters staged a rally this week outside of Immigration and Customs Enforcement in downtown Phoenix. Arizona Jews for Justice put the gathering together.
As Jews, we have a mandate from our tradition and from our history to care for the immigrant, to care for the asylum seeker, and we have seen too many deaths in detention center and American neglect of the medical needs of these asylum seekers.
Protesters are demanding that ICE change its practices surrounding medical care for undocumented migrants seeking asylum. So far, 6 minors have died while under the custody of federal immigration authorities. Other organizations joined in during this week's protest in Phoenix.
So as Lucha, we stand and we're in solidarity with all undocumented and immigrant communities. We see that immigrant and undocumented communities are not being treated right, that they are being put inferior to all other communities, and that's not right. We really need, as Lucha, we're in solidarity with all undocumented and immigrant rights through healthcare, through them being able to seek asylum here, but also with them trying to have a citizenship here and be part of the natural society.
Rabbi Shmuley Yankowitz says that as a minority group themselves, they stand in solidarity with the plight of undocumented immigrants seeking asylum.
As Jews, we have a responsibility, just like all Americans do, for some of the most vulnerable on the planet, those who arrive at our borders, to ensure that they have the food and hydration they need and the medical attention they deserve because they have infinite dignity.
Cronkite News reached out to U.S. Customs and Border Protection to get their response to the protest, but we have not received a response back. That still won't stop those who say they will continue to support immigrants until a permanent solution is found.
President Obama failed on immigration reform. President Trump is now failing, and that this is beyond a political issue. This is a moral issue, that of course we have to police our borders. Of course anyone can't just come in and receive whatever they want. But in the meantime, until they get comprehensive immigration reform, we're calling upon the humanitarian crisis to be addressed.
In Phoenix, Kevin Fleischman, Cronkite News.
One of the organizers says they will do more of these demonstrations outside of ICE headquarters until migrants receive the medical care they believe they deserve.
After a recent incident involving Tempe police officers and Starbucks made national headlines, many are asking why there's been an apparent decline in the public's confidence in law enforcement.
Cronkite News reporter Gabriella Collage spoke with a researcher today whose work shows young adults are front and center when it comes to this issue. Gabriella?
Adam Fine is an assistant professor in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at ASU. He, along with other researchers, has just released a new report showing teenagers don't feel as confident in trusting the law enforcement officers. This Tempe Starbucks, located on McKellips and Scottsdale Roads, is where a customer asked a barista that 6 Tempe police officers be removed on the 4th of July. The reason? According to reports, the person felt uncomfortable in their presence. It's an issue Professor Adam Fine knows well.
And what this study uniquely shows is that across the last decade, kids' perceptions of legal authority, like law enforcement and the justice system, have become consistently more and more negative every year.
Law enforcement agencies have recently been making headlines, and not always for the right reasons. Phoenix police officers were caught on cell phone video having an altercation with a young African-American couple back in May that has ignited rallies and protests. Fine says these kinds of images do have an effect on younger adults.
Kids today are growing up in an age where we are having national conversations about policing, about biased policing, about unjust policing, about police relationships with the community. We see social media coverage in general about law enforcement actions, oftentimes very unjust, oftentimes biased, sometimes played out of proportion.
And while agencies like Phoenix PD are taking steps to try and regain the public's trust, Professor Fine says it won't be an easy road.
So this becomes a public safety issue. The more the public does not trust law enforcement, I would say the less safe we actually are as a society.
Professor Fine also says he believes in the change in perception is driven by teens' use of social media, where in recent years they've seen a surge of negative content about policing. In the broadcast center, Gabriella Collage, Cronkite News.
During last night's Board of Education meeting, dozens of residents came out to express their stance on sex education in our state. On the agenda was a potential change in language on sex education classroom guidelines, and specifically, language referring to homosexuality. Tensions flared, and Cronkite News reporter Tanaya Williamson tells us more. Tanaya?
Well, it was a 5-hour meeting which at times became contentious. As the board considered the proposed changes, one question we wanted to answer is, how does sex ed in the class work?
Children shall be taught that explicit sexual material can refer to any image or video that depicts nudity, genitalia, sexual activity, sexual conduct.
Hundreds of people filling the room last night in Phoenix, talking about sex education and how it is given to Arizona students.
We would like the board to consider some of the following potential negative outcomes when children discuss such sensitive matters.
You can clearly see that sexual expression is not just about having vaginal, oral, or anal sex. People can express themselves sexually with a wide range of behaviors.
They appealed to Superintendent Kathy Hoffman to not move forward with the proposed changes. The superintendent actually does not have the final say on curriculum. Stefan Swyatt is the public information officer for the Arizona Department of Education and says it is out of her hands.
Local governing boards decide on curriculum. The superintendent of public instruction for Arizona cannot prescribe curriculum for schools. It is out of her reach and purview to do that.
The rule changes up for public debate were proposed after a lawsuit over a decades-old state law forbidding sexual education in public schools, promoting a homosexual lifestyle, compelled Arizona legislators to repeal it in April. Because of this, the proposed changes were: remove language that states sex education shall not include teaching of abnormal, deviant, or unusual sexual acts and practices, add language that states sex education should be medically and scientifically accurate, added language that instruction over sexually transmitted infections should include medically accurate instruction on how to prevent infection transmission, and allow schools to teach sex education to boys and girls together instead of separately. This rule change would make teaching the two genders separately an option for schools. After 5 hours and many passionate pleas from both sides, the board ultimately decided not to vote, keeping the guidelines as is. Swyatt highlighted that when it comes to sex ed in the state, parents have the last word.
A group of parents do not want their students to receive sex ed. They can go about opting out. But for the parents that want their students to receive comprehensive sex education, this would be an opportunity for them to receive it in public schools.
Today, we asked our viewers on social media what changes they want to see. Here's a sample of some of the responses we received. Elena says, I believe that within these classes, the topic of consent should heavily be pushed, as well as the topic of sending pictures to each other. Most teenagers are unaware that it is considered child pornography and evidence. While Lorraine says, kids need to know what healthy relationships and good communication means. Effective sex ed means giving young people the tools necessary to make good decisions for themselves and empowering them. We have decades of evidence showing abstinence-only programs don't work. Follow Cronkite News on Twitter and Facebook to join the conversation.
A predatory loan is a loan that is considered to take advantage of those who are borrowing it. It usually starts off at an appealing price, but can often lead to long-term repayments at astronomical annual percentage rates.
Arizonans for Fair Lending is a coalition that's working to put an end to predatory loans in the state of Arizona. Reporter Tanaya Williamson has more on why the coalition is fighting back. Tanaya?
Yes, well, I met with the coalition and members of the community today as they launched their effort to put an end to predatory lending once and for all. Arizonans voted to ban payday loans back in 2008. However, title loan companies are still offering loans that some say prey on those who are in vulnerable situations.
This isn't the first time we're seeing this issue. We've seen it happen in different ways in different vehicles, payday loans, flex loans, title loans.
Simone Bolding is the chairperson of Arizonans for Fair Lending and is fighting predatory lending.
And so we're really taking the initiative on behalf of working families here in the state of Arizona to make sure that predatory lending isn't taking advantage of our families that work hard or that may be in vulnerable situations financially.
Arizonans for Fair Lending kickstarted its signature gathering effort today to qualify its ballot measure for the November 2020 election. Known as the Arizona Fair Lending Act, the coalition needs 240,000 signatures to put it on the ballot.
Within vulnerable communities, we hear so many stories across the state about how they wanted to get $200 or $600 loans out, it ended up taking 3 to 6 months to actually pay it off, or they were getting charged over 100 to 150% interest.
A coalition volunteer says she herself took out a loan for what she thought was a quick way to pay a bill when she was younger.
When I was in my younger 20s, and sometimes you're not always smartest with money, and you're like, oh geez, I gotta pay bills. So you take a title loan out, and after a while you're like, geez, how am I to pay this back? Now I got another bill that I was trying to pay for my other bill.
The coalition aims to cap rates of such loans at 36% or lower. Some loans in the state of Arizona currently have an interest rate that go as high as 204%. Coalition reps say lenders are also exploiting a loophole in title lending law. Arizona allows loans secured only by a car's registration. Borrowers just need to provide a bank account or a credit card number to get a loan instead of the title to their vehicle.
No one obviously likes to talk about it. We don't like to talk about our debts, but that's why these places are everywhere, because unfortunately there's a need.
According to the Center for Responsible Lending, title lenders receive more than $250 million from borrowers annually. In the Broadcast Center, Tanai Williamson, Cronkite News.
With wildfires, a scarcity of water, and other environmental issues facing the Earth today, it's critical to stay up to date with local impacts of a changing climate. That's why we created Elemental, covering sustainability, a multimedia collaboration between public television and radio stations. From climate change to water conservation to renewable energy and much more, Elemental covers the latest in sustainability news. Find our stories on our website, elementalreports.com.
Horizon does a good job of explaining the many topics. Ted Simons is, I think, a very good interviewer of having experts coming on his show and asking them questions and getting from them the various viewpoints.
For more information about including Arizona PBS in your future plans, visit azpbs.org/giving.
The art of drag dates back to ancient times when men would play women in theatrical plays. Now the Phoenix drag community is showcasing diversity and inclusion.
Cronkite News reporter Jessie Jo Parley spoke with an emerging Arizona drag star about the desire to inspire others to be comfortable in the skin they're in.
As drag grows in popularity and familiarity, all kinds of people are trying it out. From ethnicity to size, drag is helping people find their own identities right here in Arizona. With the help of makeup, wardrobe, and lots of glitter, Phoenix resident Stephen Janelle transforms into rosy cheeks.
She's large but in charge. Boom.
Janelle is an up-and-coming drag queen in Arizona, something he's always wanted to do.
My grandma, when I came out, I remember her dropping me off at Pride and like, does this mean you want to dress up in girls' clothes now? And at the time, I was like a sophomore in high school, and I was like, no, Grandma, I just want to go to Pride and just have fun. But now thinking about it, I'm like, yeah.
Janelle is part of a drag family of queens of color. He's hoping to expand the perspective on being a black drag queen.
There are a lot of negative stereotypes about queer people of color or even queens of color. I'm trying to like stay out of like the realm of what everyone thinks of queens of color, because they think about them doing like hip-hop music and certain types of genres.
Black drag performers influence drag, especially in language and style, but they don't get much credit.
I think that black drag queens created and contributed and continue to offer a particular kind of drag performance that encapsulates black, urban, working class expression and kind of performance craft.
Janelle says being a black drag queen hasn't always been easy. That's why he wants to be a role model for other people of color and people of all sizes.
I want to use my drag as kind of a voice for the bigger LGBTQ kids who are scared to be themselves just because they're large or overweight. And I kind of want to be that person to inspire others.
Janelle says drag has helped him find a new identity. He hopes others will also find their identity.
Yes, people call you names and hate on you and do things to make you feel bad, but you're not alone. Somebody is there to help you and support you and help you get through this.
Janelle hopes to continue his drag career and maybe even end up on RuPaul's Drag Race. But for now, he's happy performing as much as he can in Arizona. In the studio, Jessie Jopali, Cronkite News.
When it comes to distance running, Flagstaff is a paradise for training.
The high-altitude mountain town is a haven for semi-professional distance runners who head to Flagstaff for the opportunity to keep it running.
Reporter Kyla Wilcher caught up with a few runners hoping to turn pro.
That's right, Flagstaff is more than just a beautiful mountain town. It caters to distance runners with trails, training centers, and a network of elite athletes, all to help these runners reach new heights. Colin Schultz ran the 800-meter and mile races for Liberty University in Virginia. Last fall, he moved to Flagstaff to pursue his dreams of running professionally.
And a place like this where the running trails and the running community is so prevalent that it's hard to beat.
This mountain town has 56 miles of urban trails, but only one specialty running store, Run Flagstaff, where Schultz works to support his running pursuit. He says the store is a hub for elite runners, both as customers and employees.
Run Flagstaff is well known for having some pretty legitimate runners that have worked there.
Like Run Flagstaff manager Nick Hilton, who finished in the top 40 in last year's New York City Marathon and competed in the 2016 U.S. Olympic Marathon Trials. And Schultz's co-worker, Courtney Barnes, who's also training to compete at the next level after earning first-team All-American in track at University of Kansas.
The community at first was really isolating, and I think if you talk to anyone, they would agree. It takes a while to break into it, but once you are broken into it, I think Flagstaff the running community has big open arms, and everyone supports each other really well.
Flagstaff has hundreds of trails, and Colin and Courtney say you're always likely to find a familiar face running by. Here, runners emphasize getting out of the gym and into nature.
So that's something you cannot get on an inside treadmill, even though they might show you a screen of trees as you're running through. But yeah, being out in the creation and this beautiful world, I think, can only be helpful to training.
Flagstaff has more to offer than just trails. The city's 7,000-foot elevation draws runners from around the world.
You develop more red blood cells, and so that is conducive to being able to pump oxygen to your muscles, which is helpful for running fast.
According to a 2015 study from Indiana University, high elevation training increases oxygen intake in runners, helping them breathe easier. But Barnes says Flagstaff running is about more than science.
The goal really is just to enjoy it and to use my talent to be grateful and to, share that with others and share in the experience.
Schultz is continuing to compete in Flagstaff, while Barnes is preparing for the USA Track and Field National Championships in Des Moines, Iowa, from July 25th to the 28th. Live in the newsroom, Kyla Wilcher, Cronkite News.
Several Arizona lakes are man-made and don't provide ideal habitats for fish.
Cronkite News reporter Amanda Sleeb brings us a story on a project to help fish thrive in the desert.
I'm out here at Bartlett Lake where Arizona Game and Fish is putting something different in the water for these fish.
You could call it Fish City.
David Wheatman is the Aquatic Habitat Program Manager with Arizona Game and Fish. He says these habitat enhancements will give fish some place to live.
One of my guys, we were working one day and he goes, I'm really glad we're helping out all these homeless fish.
Officials and volunteers gathered to build between 70 to 100 of these artificial fish habitats, which consist of PVC pipes and corrugated drain pipes. This is all an effort to help the ecosystem at Bartlett Lake thrive.
We're trying to replicate what's natural. As weird as that sounds with PVC and stuff, we try to replicate what would look natural in a natural built lake or river. And you look at trees and no two trees are the same.
From assembling these fish hideouts on land, we have loaded the boat to set sail.
Intern for the Aquatic Habitat Program, Hunter Pauling, says these are beneficial for many reasons.
A lot of our reservoirs in Arizona are man-made. So at the bottom, there's really no habitat. It's just barren, and fish need habitat for recruitment, for the little guys, for bigger fish to ambush, and for predation and stuff like that. So it's just important that we have habitat in here for the anglers to fish on, and just for the overall health of the population of fish.
It's expected that these structures will last 15 to 20 years or longer, depending on the water levels and exposure to sunlight.
If they stay underwater, as with all things in the Arizona sun, if the water level drops down and these get exposed to the sunlight, the UV radiation will break down the PVC and it becomes brittle, and they'll start breaking apart if they're exposed to sunlight for too long.
Arizona Game and Fish has identified 25 locations around this lake to drop these playgrounds. They will sink to about 50 feet below the high water line. Over summer and fall, they hope to have put in about 500 of these. But this isn't the only lake to get this type of fish habitat.
It's a long-term project, at least 20 years, to do the 5 different reservoirs. And as natural conditions dictate, we'll respond to those natural conditions and how the fish populations respond to those conditions to identify which reservoirs are going to get habitat structures next.
They've already implemented this into Roosevelt Lake, and they say the feedback's been really good for both the fish habitat and for fishermen in the area. Reporting live from Bartlett Lake, Amanda Slee, Cronkite News.
Tattoos are like pieces of art, and just like paintings, are produced with different paints. Tattoos can be created with different ink.
Reporter Grayson Schmidt captures a growing trend in the tattoo community, vegan ink.
And a lot of vegans don't get tattoos because they say, oh, it's full of animal products, and this and that. But it's starting to become more normal in the tattoo industry. My name is Luis Marufo. I've been tattooing a little over 3 years. Yeah, so vegan ink is an ink that doesn't contain any glycerin, animal stabilizers. A lot of black inks contain the wings of a shellac beetle. So it's got bugs in it. Different pigments have different kind of bugs depending on where they get them from. A lot of colors have different pigments. And the ink I use is carbon-based. So it's a carbon-based only. A lot of black ink is made from animal bones. So they char it down, they burn it to a complete crisp, and they use that powder as a pigment for the ink. I don't use any colored inks because a lot of them contain toxins and chemicals as well. In the colored inks, the black is a very basic ink you can use. So I use black only for all my tattoos. I find a lot of my clients like to come here even if they're not vegan. They like to come to me because it's a cleaner way of getting a tattoo. It heals much faster. It looks a lot better over time because it's just the way it heals has a lot to do with how the longevity of the tattoo, how is it going to look 5 years from now. To be honest, vegan ink is actually in the market now. It's one of the primary inks that people use in a lot of shops.
Tattoos, they say, is a permanent thing, and to me, a tattoo has to have meaning, right? And so, kind of like the first one that I got, it had its own middle meaning, but I didn't think about what it was as far as the ink itself. So the idea of that there being animal product in it, something that kind of came from a violent background, was going on my body permanently, didn't settle right.
A lot of old school shops, you kind of don't know what they're using. They might be using different inks, a lot of old school tattooers use the old inks that they used to use, but there's a lot of vegan options out there.
Aside from Marufo, there are 2 other verified vegan tattoo artists in the Valley and 1 in Tucson.
As temperatures continue to rise, so do the chances of a tire blowout.
Believe it or not, avoiding a blowout is much easier than you think. Reporter Tanaya Williamson tells us what we can do to stay on the road during the hot summer months. Tanaya?
It turns out keeping your tires in good shape is not as difficult as you may think. In fact, the reason is much closer to the surface. One thing most Arizona drivers can say is they've seen plenty of tread on the roads from tires that have blown out. The reason behind it?
Air pressure really dictates whether a tire will last, whether a tire will fail quickly or not.
Darren Young is Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Wheel Specialists Incorporated and says keeping the right amount of pressure keeps your tires intact.
Low air pressure causes heat, and the heat is what causes a tire to fail. If you have excessive heat, that's where a tire ultimately ends up failing because it does not have the correct load carrying capacity when you have low air pressure.
And it's not just low air pressure. Having too much can also be a problem.
For every 10 degrees that a tire gets hot, it increases 1 psi. So higher air pressure will cause separations and problems with your tires.
And what exactly is PSI?
Pound square inch. So it's volume of inside of the tire.
The proper PSI for tires are most commonly found on the inside panel of the driver's door on a car. It can be checked by using a gauge. Having the right PSI can keep you from having to replace your tires. But should you have a tire blowout, it could end up in the hands of ADOT.
The heat can lead to blowouts, so our maintenance crews are out looking for tire treads alongside the roads. Our contracted maintenance crews too are out there, and a lot of them wind up here at the maintenance yard, as you've seen.
Elliott says that seeing tire tread on the road is common this time of year, and he asks drivers to use precaution to avoid accidents.
If you see a tire tread in one of the travel lanes of a freeway, that's an emergency, and we ask you to call 911 if you think it is a hazard to cars.
In addition to calling 911 for tires obstructing a lane, ADOT also asks drivers to check their tires regularly and to pay close attention to how much air pressure is inside. One suggestion is to check every time you fill up your car. In the broadcast center, Tanai Williamson, Cronkite News.
That's it for this special edition of Cronkite News. Thanks for joining us. For top Arizona stories anytime, go to cronkitenews.azpbs.org.